Hello, I'm Penelope Maver, and welcome to Earth Converse, where we explore our relationship and conversations with the Earth, all in the hope of inspiring a deeper connection with ourselves, each other, and the Earth that is our home. And I am just feeling so, I don't know, I just feel so fulfilled or feel so special to have this conversation with Susanne Haegele. A year ago, I was introduced to her from Lisa Muirhead, who is a connector, and Susanne is such a connector, and I'm a little bit in awe because she is the quintessential European, is multilingual and is open-minded and sophisticated and knows the world, and she knows herself, and she's got a beautiful story of learning, connecting with herself, and she's got incredible gifts to share. Well, a lot of them is wrapped up in a book called Hormonal Harmony, but we'll get to that. We're just going to free flow as usual. And Susanne, for me, you are this. You're so generous with your gifts, and I love that. Also, you even say that on your website, and I'm going to put the link into your website. What do you say? You keep on passing on the wisdom I receive from the experts I train with and the sages that inspire me. Yeah, you're just so generous, and you're so generous with your attention, your love, your open-mindedness, and I'm just delighted to have you here. And so yeah, I mean, part of your book, you also talk about, some key principles, and we'll get to that. But one of them that really strikes out for me from a nature perspective is this disconnection connection. So where was your first connection or felt connection with the natural world?
Well, so first of all, hello, Penny, and all the viewers. You have no idea what it means to me to be on this program, because it's like being a guest on your favorite TV show. As you know, I'm an Earth Converse aficionada. So yeah, I'm just like beyond excited to be here. But I think because of that, I've been listening to a lot of the Earth Converse podcasts. And funnily enough, what strikes me is that quite often the people you interview speak of nature in a very general sense, like nature. And to them, it seems obvious what that encompasses. And I think for me, my earliest connections with nature were through animals. I think it's, as a child, like many children, I really related to animals and I loved them. And, we, when I was about 10, we got a pet rabbit. And that was like my first, I suppose, intimate connection with nature, because a rabbit is obviously always a little bit more or less tame than, say, a dog, certainly, and to a certain extent a cat. So a rabbit will just do its rabbit thing most of the time, but that one was actually quite tame and would live with us inside the house. But yeah, so the rabbit that we had in the house, and then the other big connection with nature was through going into the woods, and more specifically to a nature park in the woods in the region that my mum comes from in southwestern Germany, which is the Pfalz, Palatinate, where we used to go and feed the deer and the rabbits and be all, it was contained. It was a park. It wasn't a really wild environment, certainly not the kind of wild environment that your American or Canadian interviewees may have known. Yeah, it was this habit of going into the woods and interacting with the deer and the wild boar, even through a fence. I'm a suburban child, so I didn't really grow up in the wild at all. But we had this pet rabbit, and we used to go into the woods in the summer.
Yeah, but what did it mean to you, for being a suburban,
I liked it a lot. I was more comfortable. I think, I'm a child of the 70s, and as many of us would probably identify with, we didn't get all these diagnoses and labels that children might get today. But from doing all sorts of tests later on in life, people would probably call me like a highly sensitive person or something like that. And so I find city environments really stressful because they give me too much input. And when I'm in nature, although it's full of input, it seems to be a more, well, natural input that my nervous system knows how to process. So being surrounded by lots of trees is easier for me to process than being surrounded by lots of buildings.
It's a beautiful thing. I can imagine so many would experience the same. I mean, I didn't grow up in suburbia, but I could feel exactly the same. It, you know, in terms of that calming the nervous system and different stimuli. But I think it's really interesting what you say about sort of the animals, because it's quite often that's the access, isn't it, to something wild, the non-human world that is a natural connection point for so many children.
Yeah, I think the animal is often the bridge between us and the natural world.
Yeah, beautiful. And what does your roots mean, like, as a European? You know, like, I mean, because then you moved to France when you were 3, didn't you? So, you know, like, what are your roots?
Yeah, I struggled with that for a long time until I kind of realized that the national labels don't work for me. So I was never completely French because I had a very German surname, and we had German traditions for Christmas and Easter, and we used to go to Germany to spend time with my grandmother during the summer holidays. So I wasn't around, and certainly in the 70s and 80s, the memories of the war were still more present. So I was never entirely French. But then as I arrived in Germany after school with 19, then I wasn't completely German either, because I had a slight touch of a tiny little bit of an accent, and I dressed differently. And, you know, back in the 70s and 80s, we didn't have like German TV in France. So I hadn't watched the same programs, and I hadn't, you know, listened to the same music as the other people. So I wasn't completely German either. And then being European for me was really liberating in a sense, because during my school time, because I was German in France, I went to an international school. And so I had most of my lessons in French, but then we would break up in national sections for certain classes. And then we had teachers from our home countries. So I was in the German section with German teachers and other German kids from the other classes, and then the other ones went to the Portuguese section or the Swedish section, Italian, American, English, Danish, you know. And so I was kind of used to that, but also my school was chosen to take part in the first European Youth Parliament, and we were an extra delegation of translators. This is something that was completely novel at the time in the 80s. It started in 1988, but it's now like an established thing that many schools take part in Europe, and they send delegations, and then they meet and they kind of model. The same thing exists at the UN level. There's the Model United Nations, you may have heard of. Well, there's the European Youth Parliament as well, and then they split up in like thematic groups and debate about issues, and then they bring resolutions which are then sent to the real European Parliament to make the voice of the young people heard. And so there I was, growing up with German and French as my, say, native languages. And then I had English and Italian as foreign languages in school. So I had some English speaking friends who I could go home with and hang out and, you know, see magazines that they brought back from the US and stuff. And then I learned Italian. I had this Italian friend that would make these tapes for me with Italian music. And, you know, it was just liberating to be European, but also because I grew up with this high consciousness of like a historic background, you know, I have grand uncles that died in the war, and then in France there was a very alive culture of memory of the First and Second World War. So I was confronted with this all the time, and so I was quite aware of the fact that Europe as a European Union was built to make sure that war wouldn't return to our land. And what I'm saying is that I believe in Europe as a peace project, and so that's why it's so difficult for me with the whole Brexit debate, and why I never really fit in the UK, because they only ever saw it as a free trade agreement. And for anybody who's French or German and who has lost family on the battlefields and has crossed through Verdun, you know, my family's way home to Germany was always through those battlefields. You couldn't go anywhere else. To the region we were going to, you had to go through Eastern France, and that's where all the battlefields were. And so for me, European Union is peace.
I love it. And honestly, in terms of, just gives me goosebumps you talking about that. And I mean, it's so, and even you saying like confronting, so it's so there, and it's so, and it's, you know, what is it? The past is always present, as David Rico would say. You know, it's very much part of your psyche and your, and even you're confronting or just resolving that. It's a, yeah. I don't know if you want to say anything about that journey of.
Well, it's one of the reasons I joined the German Foreign Service, and it's one of the reasons I studied political science, because I just wanted to understand how the world works, want to understand how things evolve into going from war to peace and peace to war, and then bring my tiny, humble little contribution. Certainly being German, you grow up with or at least in my generation, you grew up with a certain sense of responsibility. And I suppose some of us felt like there was a need for atonement or participating in peace projects. And so, you know, through the way I had grown up, it was a Franco-German focus that I had of building bridges between those two countries, which is also why later I became a translator, because I'm able to understand the nuances in the language in both French and German. And so a translator is a bridge maker, and so is a civil servant. It's the same thing in a different guise, in a sense.
Yeah, I love that incredible skill set, and holding those worlds, and helping that. I know you create connection, you help people belong. It's, yeah. And I also, I'm just thinking, you know, in terms of the youth parliament, or just the responsibility, how sort of mature, or that wider perspective, you know, growing up in this way of being the sort of global strategic issues. And that's big, isn't it?
Yes, it's probably big seen from the outside, but it, you know, it's like everything. It was normal to me. Just like the school that I went to, everybody spoke several languages. So it didn't mean anything until I left school. And then much later, my partner is Australian, and I went with him to visit the battlefields in the Somme, which was really important to his family. And he took lots of pictures, and really, you know, Anzac, it's really, really important to them. For me, with the German background, it's more Eastern France with Verdun and all those areas. But certainly for Anzac people, it's the Somme. And although they have this like cult of the First World War in the Anzac countries, and they certainly have an awareness of these battles, there didn't seem to be a lot of emphasis on history in the schooling that they have, because my partner certainly went to a very good school, but be it about the First World War or other things, there was very little awareness of how it all fit together, which countries were involved, how long it lasted, where it came from, you know, what happened before and afterwards. Amazing.
No, we have just such a dearth of that, and we have a dearth of Maori history too, and I think sometimes part of me being over here, I didn't plan out to be in Europe for 20 years, but there's something about sort of really wanting to feel that. And I remember going to Trieste to study, and I was overwhelmed at how much the war would come up in conversations.
I mean, Trieste is an incredible location. We've spoken about this before. I used to visit from Croatia. I used to go shopping there because the closest Italian supermarket from Zagreb was Trieste, and it was my little Italian island. We had to go through Slovenia and then we could get there. But yeah, certainly Trieste is awash with history. And then you lived in Rome, and obviously that takes you even further back. And that's something, you know, the Roman history is what we start with in high school. And, you know, children at that age, they can't be bothered usually. They're not very interested. And then if they're in a Latin country, they even have some Latin classes, you know. It doesn't mean a lot to them, but certainly then if you go to Rome, where it's all still very much alive, and then you see that it's not just a story from the history book, it's actually the Colosseum is still there. The you know, the Terme di Caracalla, all of this is still in the middle of modern Rome.
You know, no, it really is mind-blowing in that respect. There's sort of the oldest living city, you know, 2,500 years ago, and it's alive and kicking, and yeah,
kicking, certainly kicking your butt more often than not. Yeah.
I'm not going to faint-hearted. So, oh my goodness, yeah, because I love the idea of roots. And I mean, you know, I use this term a lot, I suppose, roots and wings. And you've got well-developed roots and well-developed wings. And
I don't know if I have such well-developed roots. I went looking for them by moving to Germany, but my parents were born in the war, and I think people in Germany have local roots. They will tell you a lot about the town or city or village they come from and their region. But a lot of people, German history as such is a bit of a touchy feeling. And even at that time, instilling values in your children was sometimes, you know, not frowned upon, but like taken with care. You certainly wanted them to be good citizens, but you didn't want to influence them too much because of the influencing that had gone on in previous generations, you know. So I don't know how deep the roots are. I mean, there's a reason why my parents chose to move abroad. You know, they wanted to reinvent themselves as well, and you know. I think, as you know, when you move to a different country, or maybe even just to a completely different part of your own country, you get a chance to reinvent yourself. Because, for example, as I said before, anywhere I go in Germany, when I say my name's Susanne Haegele, oh, you're from that region. But then the moment you step out of Germany, nobody knows. They don't know how to pronounce it either, but they certainly don't know where you come from or what kind of cliches that might be associated with. Or, for example, one of my alma maters is Sciences Po. It's the French, you know, one of the universities for political science. And if you are in France, everybody knows it, and it's a big kind of, it puts a label on your head right there. But outside of France, it doesn't mean anything. And you know, that's the kind of thing you realize when you travel, and when you go somewhere else, you get a chance to reinvent yourself. The labels you come with are transparent and not to be seen for the people that you meet. And that can be a good thing, because you can start with 0 labels on your forehead and then just reinvent yourself.
There's so much there. Why do we move? You know, is it to move away from something or leave something, you know, towards something or away from something, isn't it?
Yeah, both probably.
I do think, in terms of, it is interesting, we spend our time with our identities and our labels, and then they go to somewhere else and they're not even significant.
No. And it doesn't matter in nature at all. I think, yeah, that's something we've discussed before. It's like, you know, young people where I come from are so encouraged to like get a nice CV, get all the right names on there, do all the right things. but I don't know that I or my niece and nephew could survive in the wild, because we don't know to make a fire, we don't know, how to build a hut, we don't know where to find the water or anything like that. So we don't even know how to grow our own food. So we're dependent on a supermarket, we're dependent on the electricity corporation, we're dependent on the water that comes from the state. So yeah, I mean, the labels and the things we went off and learned when we were young to fit into mainstream society don't mean anything in nature. And if the global collapse of civilization does come to pass, then everybody's saying the only ones that will be left will be the last few indigenous people that we haven't killed yet, because they're the ones who know how to survive in a non-commodified environment.
Yeah, true. And I think that, I mean, COVID has really sort of highlighted that. What did it mean to you to be in that as a translator, and then with the government?
Well, I was with the government first. I became a German civil servant in the Foreign Service after school. I was selected after a selection process, and then they train you themselves in their own internal school, which is nowadays a Bachelor of Administration specializing in foreign affairs, because it's a very specific training that you need to work in an embassy as a consular officer. I mean, passports and visas and helping Germans in difficult situation and all these things. That's very specific. And so we learned that for 3 years with an alternating theory and practice skills. And then so I worked after that in the foreign ministry in the protocol section, receiving incoming visits of state. And then and during my training I was in Rome for a year, and afterwards I went to Zagreb, to the embassy there. I was head of the visa section there, and that's when I decided to get out of that. And then I had to kind of reinvent myself, so I went back to university to do some more political science and got another government job. But then I decided that what was going to give me more freedom, including so that I could live closer to nature and didn't have to stick around the big cities where the government jobs were, I went to I took a test to become a translator. And so I then became a state certified translator, because I wanted to move towards the kind of life that I have now, where I live somewhere and I just sit there and translate, and I don't have to be in the capital city and near the seat of government or near the embassy.
Yeah, just in terms of that independence, but also still in that sort of global connected and translating and bigger picture, but wherever you want to be.
Yeah, and that plan was formed before the internet became as huge as it is now. I mean, I still learned with chunky big dictionaries and things, and you would have books behind you in the shelf with certain themes, and legal French and German for bakers and whatever, and depending on what you were specializing in. And you would have to go to libraries to find books on certain subjects to see what words they were using. Nowadays it's even easier. If you have a good internet connection, a translator can work from anywhere, and they do.
Just to elaborate more on being a translator, like, it's sort of, there's an external, as a job, but what it means to you, what have you known about yourself as a translator, and sort of an internal, your own true nature around that?
Well, it's the bridge building that I mentioned before. I think translators create bridges between cultures, and they are very much needed. Because as you will have experienced yourself, you get a completely different understanding of another culture if you understand their language. But if you don't, for example, I'm sure some of your favorite poems are translations. I'm sure you love Hermann Hesse, for example, and you were reliant on good translations of his German. And, so lots of things like that. And so if it weren't for the translators, then for many people, some of the great works of literature would remain unavailable. Think of the great Russians, and I mean, what it would take to learn good enough Russian to be able to read them in the text. And yeah.
Yeah, really. Oh my goodness. Doesn't bear thinking about. What was the needing to reinvent yourself to
I didn't really fit into the Foreign Service. I mean, I went into it in the beginning because I liked the combination of going to different places all the time, but having a really secure job and taking your kind of structure with you. So, it's more or less the same job with always different kind of legal aspects to look at, whether you're in the German embassy in London or the German embassy in Cape Town or the German embassy in Lima, Peru, So of course you need different skill sets, and then you might need translators. But it's pretty much the same job, and the structure works the same, and your colleagues follow the same hierarchy, and you might meet the same person again in Peru that you were already working with in London, so there was that combo, so that appealed. And certainly I think for a young person, it's very reassuring to be a civil servant, because you've got your paycheck at the end of the month, and they give you kind of a perspective of what you need to do to move up the career ladder. But then I quickly realized that I wasn't very good at being told how long I had to stay in one place. So, for example, when I was in Rome for 1 year for my practical training, I was really heartbroken when I had to leave. I was really happy there. I spoke Italian. I had lots of friends, and I found Rome endlessly fascinating. But after 1 year, my stay was over, so I had to go. I never said the system should change. I just decided, okay, it looks like I don't fit into the system. And also, if you're hypersensitive, it's really difficult to work as a young person in an environment where you have to take a lot of decisions that affect people's lives. So especially for me, being a 26-year-old head of the visa section, deciding on whether people were allowed to travel to Germany for work or study or to be with their family or not, that was huge responsibility, and the amount of like complaints and tears and things that you had to deal with when people didn't get what they want, or the kind of pressure that you might receive if they were trying to influence you, that's hard. And I just wasn't the right person for that.
Can you ever give like coaching or psychotherapy support to people?
Well, we don't get a lot of that in our training. There might be more now. I'm talking about, I was trained in the early 90s, so I don't know, it might be better now. There's a bit of continued professional development happening. I certainly did take part in a stress coaching, because some of us don't have that much to do, but quite a few consular offices are really, really flooded with work, and it's certainly gotten even worse since I left, because of the advent of email. So the citizens have much more access now to you, and their barriers are much lower. If you had to sit down and write a query to an embassy in a letter and then post it through the post office, you might think about it twice. But the amount of angry emails an embassy receives nowadays through the contact form of the embassy website, written at 2 o'clock in the morning when people have had too much wine, that's like difference, and you have to answer each of these queries very politely and accurately. So the workload's certainly gotten worse, but there's a little bit, and there is a psychological there's some psychologists within the medical department of the Foreign Office, and they do try to help people a lot. And if you can't take it, then certainly they're going to look after you.
It's such a big thing, and quite often we can just see the bureaucracy when we dealing with the system of that.
No, there's people behind it. There's people behind that screen. Yeah.
Diana in episode 12, she talked about, just a career woman, and she'd been in France and then to Barcelona and then traveling around the world but actually feeling quite disconnected from herself and nature. Was that sort of part of, I need to reinvent myself, or?
Yes, I mean, certainly for me, the idea was to, if I was going to travel and move to another country, I wanted the freedom of choosing it. And, to give you an example, I mean, I love Mallorca and I love the fact that I was able to come and live here because I'm a translator and my work comes from somewhere else. But the German consulate in Mallorca is very small. I think they have 1 or 2 expatriate members. So the likelihood of me ever being posted here for work, if I had stayed in that career, was like almost non-existent. And and it's fine, they need people to go everywhere, I completely understand that, but I wanted to be able to put down roots in a place that worked for me. I ended up, funnily enough, moving almost more often than many of my Foreign Office friends did, just because then there was work here and then there was studying there and then there was a partner here and this and that happened. So I suppose if you have traveling and the international aspect in your birth chart, then that's just what's going to hit you, even if you try to leave. But altogether, yes, I wanted the opportunity to explore different places, different parts of myself as well, not be constricted to a certain role. And then also having this whole Franco-German background. I mean, for example, when I was in Zagreb and then it was time to go home for the holidays, for like Christmas, I was on the plane to Paris with all the people from the French embassy, whereas my German colleagues were all taking the car up to Germany. And so I was always kind of a mix. And as we said earlier, labels just, they don't always fit. And they can be really reassuring, or they can give people a sense of identity, but it doesn't always work.
And this sort of external, sort of either countries or partners or jobs or studying, and then so it's quite external. So when did the real inner journey come?
Well, I was always, I suppose, what you would call in the vocabulary of the people that I hang out with nowadays, you would say I was always kind of spiritual, because my parents weren't in the church or anything, but I grew up wanting to go to church, and I asked to be baptized in the Catholic faith, and I used to go to Catholic church all the time, and be quite involved in that. I have 3 goddaughters and all of that. And living in Rome, obviously you were in the capital of Catholicism.
Or did you read something, or did you hear something, or was just a young person sort of?
Yeah, I suppose there was part of it. I liked the fact that it was transmitting some values. So it was telling you very, what you could strive for and what kind of person you could want to become. But also it's the community aspect that I really like, the whole being together on a Sunday morning and singing together and praying together and being silent together. And then the part that I always liked was when I suppose they don't do that at the moment with COVID, but when you shake hands with everybody and say, may the peace of the Lord be with you and with you, and all of that. We say that in the Christian religion during the Mass, in the Catholic Mass. So I liked the community, I liked the singing, I liked the praying, I liked the idea of having ethics and morals and all of that. So, and then later I started practicing yoga because I had backache, especially in the neck region. I used to work with something here around my neck as if I'd just had an accident and whiplash, but it was because of my weak neck muscles and my scoliosis and all of that I experienced a lot of pain when I was sitting at my desk translating all day long. So I started yoga, and then there are some aspects of yoga that people aren't necessarily aware of, and that also don't get taught in all schools. But yoga isn't just physical postures and breathing. That's relatively early on in the training, let's say, and some people can definitely stay there, and that's fine. It's still going to completely change their lives, because if you breathe right and you move right and you hold yourself right meaning according to what the human physiology needs, then you already feel so much better, and then your life's going to be better and the life of the people around you is going to be better. But then you move on in yoga and you go towards things like quietening the mind, withdrawing from the events, putting yourself in the position of the observer. So taking a step back from any event, be it very joyful or very sad or anything else, and then just taking a moment to come back to yourself and then act rather than react and all of that. So the more philosophical and ethical aspects of yoga, I found them really fascinating. And there again, there are schools where you will be very much encouraged to follow sort of a Hindu tradition, which is certainly where yoga comes from. It does come from Hinduism, comes from India. And so one of my earliest schools was definitely, we were learning the mantras that go with the deities. We had pictures of the deities around. We were being encouraged to follow a tradition of surrendering to a teacher, which is called a guru, a person who takes you from darkness to light. But then later I was lucky to meet other teachers and to branch out, and you can perfectly live all those teachings of yoga without actually having anything to do with Hinduism. And you can either insert them in your existing religion and then practice them together and help them grow together, or you can just be non-religious and practice yoga. Both work. Yeah.
I love that. I love the pragmatism of that, and I love, for a start, in terms of your own going into Catholicism as a young person, but liking the ceremony and the rituals of that, which you've also enjoyed with exploring yoga and the Hinduism of that. But knowing that, but also going, letting go. You can incorporate it and make it yours. And I think that's a lovely wisdom and freeing, because we can be quite scared of that thing. And I also wonder how many people do access yoga through the physical. I'm feeling sore, I need to stretch, I've got to sore this, I've got to sore that, and they enter yoga for that reason, and then end up enjoying the more value driven or mind or spiritual emotional journey.
Yes, well, like I said, there's nothing wrong with just focusing on the postures and the breathing. That can be a lifetime of practice. And certainly the path that I've chosen as somebody who's interested in the therapeutic applications of yoga, that's definitely a good part of what I do. Is like certain ways of moving will be good for certain things in your body, and then adding the more, inner work, such as meditation or journaling or mantra repetition, that can quieten the mind more. But you can even just quieten the mind a lot with the right postures and the right breathing. If you have a relatively active practice and then you end that with some restorative practices, which is like staying for a long time in a simple yoga pose, which supports the body and activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the one that's in charge of regenerating and calming us, then you will also get massive benefits. And then you add some deep breathing, because a lot of us have a breath that's too shallow, and also a lot of people have inverted breathing. Like, quite often it's normal, don't worry about it if you have it, but if you want to try it, a lot of people, if they put their hands on their belly, then quite often the belly expands when they exhale and it draws in when they inhale. I'm even struggling to say it because it's so wrong, but really physiologically your belly is soft when you inhale, so that your lungs can expand and take up more space and fill up with air, whereas your belly button draws in and your pelvic floor becomes active and draws inwards and up to help push the air up and out of your lungs for the exhale. So yeah, if you can just have a deep breath and a non-inverted breath, then that's already going to have massive benefits for you in all aspects of your life. Even if you don't go into meditation and you never go on a retreat, or you never, you never use one of those for 108 repetitions of the same mantra or anything like that.
What I love about you is that you've got this depth. You know either the history of Germany and France, or you know the history of yoga, but there's also this lightness and just sort of awareness, whatever's happening, and this, just make it work for you. And so I know that your book Hormonal Harmony is the same wisdom. It's got that this depth, but pragmatism and allowing. It's like so adultness. But anyway, I'm jumping ahead because I want you to talk about the book. But it came from yoga, and then you went into women's health more specifically.
Yes, so I started out in a relatively general yoga tradition, as I said, to heal some back pain, and that worked really well, thank you. So that was a relatively general yoga school, but with a very traditional, as I said, a bit Hindu approach. I learned in India, and then they had a school and an ashram in Europe as well, so I was able to continue in the same tradition for a while. And then I found another tradition that was also from India that was, similar but different. And then I think what happened, what was a real breakthrough for me was hearing about Françoise Friedman and her school, the Birthlight School. So she's this French person who is an ethnologist and, a specialist of tribes in Latin America that she's lived with, but then also a very well-trained yoga teacher and a lover of water. So she also teaches people how to move in the water, and especially children and pregnant women. But yeah, the Birthlight School and Françoise Friedman, that was a big breakthrough because she has a therapeutic approach to yoga. She focuses on women's health and families and children. And certainly, they say the teachers and the students find each other. So I found Françoise for a reason, and the Birthlight School, but also my students would come to me with certain requests and questions and inquiries that were, I happen to teach a lot of pregnant women, although I've never been pregnant myself. And I had to get that training because it was just a recurring occurrence in my life that I was teaching yoga to pregnant women. So I wanted to know what I was doing. And then from there, they have a specialization in postnatal yoga. And it turns out that a lot of women, we call it the fourth trimester, the whole postnatal part, there is not enough support for the woman in that time, and for many of them that's crucial. And so then I did the postnatal specialization, and then they have a program called Well Woman, and that's a beautiful program for just being there for women through all stages of their life and trying to figure out what does the woman's body and heart and soul need that most of my students were asking me to help them.
Love the student and the teacher thing. And so what was it for you to explore your own women's health, or there's sort of for you personally?
Yes, certainly. My interest in these things started because I was at some stage, even before I did yoga or started practicing yoga, I was diagnosed with hypothyroidism, so low thyroid function. And that runs in my family, as it does in many families. And I had hypothyroidism and I was on medication, levothyrox, and I'm no longer on that medication. I'm not here to say, ditch your medication or yoga is going to be your magical solution. What I'm saying is that sometimes people would need support for a while and not necessarily forever from a medication, or sometimes the medication is going to fix the problem and people are going to feel so much better in the moment, but it won't address the underlying cause, like the nutrients that were missing or the lifestyle issues that were going on. And certainly the medication is going to give you the same dose every day, whereas if you have a functioning organ, and we're taking the thyroid as an example, but it goes for other things as well, then if you have a functioning organ, then it's going to give you just as many hormones as you need, depending on what's going on in your life. But if you have medication, then it's going to give you the same dose all the time. Really, once you're put on this medication, it's forever. That's what the doctors tell you. And that was because I'm always like obsessed with independence. That was one of the things that I don't really like. And indeed, a couple of years ago, they changed the recipe for levothyrox, and a lot of people, it didn't agree with them, and they started feeling ill. They were dependent on it. And the same now with Brexit, for example. I know some people who are on levothyrox in the UK, and they're really worried about not being able to get it because apparently it wasn't manufactured in the UK or whatever. But I knew some people who were really worried about not being able to get their medication. And so I don't want to be dependent on something exterior like that.
Like independence value, but also this curiosity, but your own book. Here we go, hormonal harmony. Here we go. But a natural guide to women's well-being. And I love this naturalness, our own body resourcefulness and our own ability to self-heal. Yes, tell us about the premise of the book. And
yeah, so it's based on what I learned in the Birthlight School and on the experiences I had with other teachers. Somebody taught me, a wonderful French teacher called Dominique Cazot taught me another hormone yoga sequence. And then my own experiences with myself and my students, and a lot of reading that I did around the subject, and then all the people I met who had opinions and ideas. And so because I'm inherently lazy, I don't like to repeat myself all the time, so I thought I'll just put everything down in writing, have a couple of good photos and graphics done, and then I'll just shove that into people's faces when they ask, because they all ask the same questions all the time. And so yeah, that was basically the idea. So it's not a yoga book in itself, but because I come from the yoga world, the physical postures that I show are yoga poses, and the breathing comes from the yoga tradition as well. But you could come at this from other angles as well, in terms of certainly you could come at it with Qigong or Tai Chi, certainly. So anything that's moving the body with an idea of moving the energy in the right way and breathing in the right way, strengthening you, but at the same time calming you, and calming the nervous system and sharpening the mind, and improving the posture, better breathing, as we've already noticed. So this is for the practical poses that are shown in the book, and also on my YouTube channel I show them there. But then I explained a little bit about anatomy and physiology, because there's people like the vagus nerve that not a lot of people know, but that have a huge influence on you and on a lot of things that you do. Or this guy here, the psoas, not a lot of people realize that it has a big influence on women's well-being, amongst other things. So there's some yoga sequences in there with illustrations to give you an idea, but it's not mainly about that. It's about how does a woman's body and mind work, and what do they need in order to be well. So I asked some of my friends to contribute, who come from Chinese medicine, like Miriam Wagner or Tiffany Bown or Janny White, who come from the Chinese medicine background and had something to say about acupuncture and keeping your belly warm and keeping your meridians open. And then I have Nadège Lanvin, who is a moon mother. So she explains about an energetic practice called a womb blessing that some women find really beneficial. And then there's my friend Stephanie Lolivre, who speaks about Ayurveda and how Ayurveda can actually help balance women's hormones. Ayurveda is the sister science of yoga. It's like the medical aspect, and then Sarah Davison, who is another good friend of mine from Notting Hill, from London, who is a homeopath. And my conversations with her were one of the starting points of the book, because we both kind of joined this online Facebook group called Menopause Chicks. And there were all these women that were no end complaining about all the things that were going really horribly wrong. And while it was interesting, because sometimes it helped you make sense of things, it was also disheartening when you thought at how much these women were suffering when there were so many solutions out there. And for example, things like hot flushes, Sarah has really good results with homeopathy in that area, and anxiety as well, and all sorts of things. Just as fertility, for example, so many women struggle with their fertility, and acupuncture works really well for these things. And there's period pain, such a massive subject. You know, I don't think there's an office that I've worked in, and I've worked in many, where half the women weren't suffering from period pain. And so, and you know, and then the worst thing is that women think it's normal to suffer, to be like completely debilitated on the first day of your period. Well, it's not. That's not how it's meant in nature. So yeah, there's a lot there.
No, there's so much there, and I love this sort of connecting all the people and the wisdom, you know, that you've gathered on the way. That's so you, and packaging in this way that's so accessible for a young woman who's just started her period to, you know, to menopause and, you know, 85, well, beyond. I love this book that expands generations, you know, of women.
Well, I had this vision of one generation giving it to the other two. So you could either be the mum who passes it on to the grandmother and the daughter, or you could be the daughter going, Mom, just give me a break and read the book. Or you could be the grandmother giving it straight to the granddaughter going, Child, your mom is going to tell you the essential things, but they're all in here. So, you know, these things.
What you do in that book is that it's this one again, once again, this adultness, you know, I'm talking to an equal, you know, your own body. And if you were exploring it, here's some questions that you may want to ask yourself or your practitioner. You know, it's really enabling and empowering, really beautiful.
That's the idea. Knowledge is power, you know. It's so true.
Roy White, he talked about, I did podcasts, I think he was 8, and he just talked about the natural way of being, you know, just to stripping it down. And you're like, you know, I know your value of that sort of simplicity, but there's a depth behind it, but also there's, like, for example, like movement. We don't actually, if we talk about getting population to do exercise, but actually just movement, you know, if we reword it and it becomes accessible, doesn't it? I don't have to have an exercise regime. It's just about different movement or...
Yes, I find that a lot, for example, in the Anglo culture, there's a lot of focus on having an exercise regime and all of that, you know, and whereas really what your body needs is certain movements. And so in terms of women, for example, one movement that's missing is the round movements, the circular movements, because women in traditional cultures have much more of a balancing gait, you know, and then the other one is squatting, which is how people everywhere except here go to the bathroom. And it's like a real issue for, you know, menstruation and for constipation and lower back issues from sitting on chairs. And yeah, I mean, this is gaining a bit of traction. So people are more aware nowadays that sitting on chairs for long periods of times isn't very beneficial. But certainly one of the main things that I teach people is to relearn how to squat. If it's difficult for you due to all sorts of things happening in your body, then both me and any other good yoga teacher or practitioner that you talk to will be able to show you how to access the posture little by little with lots of little tricks that can help you get there. And if it's completely impossible for you, for example, if you have 2 knee replacements and you need to be, or not yet replaced, but like 2 broken knees and they need, you know, you can't squat, then there's alternative things that you can do. But yeah, certainly, so hip circles and squats are certainly 2 of the big movements that women in our culture miss, and what's causing problems for them. Yeah.
I remember just somebody telling me that actually with cultures, giving birth in a squat. Why would you lie down? So
yeah, no, that's a big thing in the birthlight tradition, is that we show, like in the birth preparation course, we show them a pelvis, and we show them where the where the different bones are, and how it will affect you to lie on your back. And in most cases, you will be on all fours.
one of the lovely I love your chapters, and I suppose the disconnection connection, and I don't know, do you want to just say a little bit about that?
Yes, I suppose in a few words. So they're the two sides of the same medal, because I've got 2 out of 5 elements that I call disconnection and connection. And so the whole point is you need both, because if you don't ever have a moment of silence, whether it's walking the dog or doing some gardening or sitting for meditation or painting, calligraphy, or doing your knitting without doing something else at the same time, anything that you can get absorbed in without having all this external input, especially of other people or the news or whatever, that's going to help you hear your inner voice. And for example, back to our nature conversation, I always say that the first time I really heard my inner voice was on a very long walk on a long beach. My parents used to have a flat in Normandy, and you could go for endless walks on this really flat piece of beach. And I used to do that a lot. And it's a bit embarrassing, but the first time I ever heard my inner voice was on a beach, and it said very hesitatingly to me, it said, maybe you should watch less TV. That was that was the first thing.
Brilliant, very wise in a voice.
Yeah, because at the time, as the political scientist and translator that I was, I used to come home and watch the news in 4 languages. So the 7 o'clock news in German.
No, too much.
So yes, the inner voice only comes through in silence. So find some activity in your day that will allow you to hear that, and maybe you'll get interesting messages like maybe you should watch less TV. And
so wise, darling. So just that silence, it's the only way you can listen to your inner voice. And how often are we into that silence, drop down to that?
Yes, in our culture, yeah. And then the other side of the same medal is connection, and that's something that you see a lot, as well. Is as humans, we have evolved in tribes, and there might be the shaman up on the hill who does his own thing because he needs more time to listen to his inner voice, because that's his job and where his talent lies. But most people, we evolve in tribes. And for example, in the pre and postnatal phase, this is a massive issue. Yeah. So all these women who are pregnant or newly mums, and they spend a lot of time either by themselves or in an environment where there are no wise women or no other pregnant women, or and the transmission from one generation to the next also doesn't always take place. I had a very big experience of that in London always, because I was teaching in East London, pre and postnatal yoga, and it was amazing. I loved the community, and I'm still in touch with many of the women who were pregnant and then postnatal in my classes, but they were from everywhere in the world. There were some Chinese ladies, some Indian ladies, there were Italian, Spanish, French, Polish, Hungarian, Russian, what have you, and they were all having their baby away from their home culture. And if their mothers were able to come, then it was a big deal, because usually people lived in small flats, and the mom coming from far away was going to come for an entire month and not just drop by every day for half an hour, and so all this whole cultural aspect of it's a real problem. And also for menopausal women, there's a lot of perimenopausal women who find that it's so helpful. Like, takes me back to the Facebook group Menopause Chicks. I mean, sometimes you read these women on there that go, oh my God, I'm so glad I have this group. It's 3 o'clock in the morning and I know you're out there somewhere listening to me. I need to have a big moan. And, you know, it's just the people need support. And it's one thing to get it online. It's great. It's better than nothing. But you know, there's something about getting a hug. At the moment it's difficult, I know, but a hug or a voice or seeing somebody or having somebody just offer you a tea or a flower or a pat on the shoulder and just being there with you, that makes such a difference. And it's normal. We're tribal humans. It's
we
like
crave.
that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you're a big advocate of the circle process of, yeah.
Yeah, it works so well. Women always come back saying, I didn't expect it to be so powerful, or I didn't, you know, I meet my friends for coffee all the time. I didn't think there would be any benefit for me sitting in a circle. And we get a lot of that in your solo togethers as well. I mean, I know they're not meant to be women's circles, but the ones that I've been in, there's never been a guy on them, unlike your show, which is full of interesting men, very interesting men. But the solo togethers that I've been on, we've been women, and you organize brilliantly a sharing circle before and after the 2 hours we spend alone in nature. So we get the connection and disconnection all together in a solo together. It's the perfect combination, because there's the circle before and after, there's the walking up the mountain together and the walking down the mountain together. But in between, there's a 2 hours of silence and just being by yourself, where you get a chance to hear your inner voice. So these two aspects are perfectly illustrated in that format that you kindly offered to us here in Mallorca.
Nice plug, thanks. No, but you know, how we dance with that, you know, and also the sacredness of both. You know, like you're saying, you know, we can chat, you know, there's a chat and just being with friends, but there's something, the beautiful of intention, whether it be a woman's circle or a men and woman circle or a solo together, or like you were saying, you know, in terms of back to church, you know, the ceremony, there's something different. It's a different energy, isn't it?
Yes.
And yeah, beautiful. And I mean, because this is part of your whole philosophy, I mean, I'll ask you, because you're a, you know, permaculturalist, you're one of your gurus is the lovely Satu.
You're jealous about that one. To our readers and viewers and listeners, so she's totally jealous because I have spent a weekend with Satish Kumar and she hasn't yet. And he's like the most amazing man. And I was really lucky to be able to go to Devon, to Schumacher College, and spend a weekend with him once. And then Penny's really jealous about that one.
You're just guiding, aren't you? I just wonderful, you know, to be in the presence of such somebody so wise. But your permaculture, your way of living, it's very much aligned with that. So I guess the big question to explore is, what conversations do you think, you know, we can step into, or what will move us through in terms of a more natural way of well-being as a society, as a, you know, as a planet? Or...
Well, I think permaculture explains or shows or demonstrates that independence and living an autonomous life is still a very interdependent process. So I think what we need to do is understand how to more rely on each other as neighbors and families and friends, rather than on the state. And I say that as a former civil servant, or on big corporations, and I say that with all respect, because certainly at the moment, in the times of the pandemic, haven't we just noticed how helpful it was if you had a friend who either could go to the supermarket for you, or even better, had a field and was able to help you out with a few tomatoes and lettuce, or if the water runs dry in your area, how helpful it is if somebody can show you how to collect rainwater, or will let you collect some water from their well, and then you might be able to show them another skill. So being autonomous and independent still includes a lot of interdependence. And so I think people should ask themselves where they're putting the responsibility for their well-being. Are they acting on their own behalf, or are they being like children and expecting the state or the authority or the corporation to look after them? There's a brilliant film I can recommend to your viewers and listeners. It's very simple and fun. It's nothing highbrow, but it's very effective in its message. It's called 2040. It's by this Australian guy called Damien Gameau. We can put it later in the subtitles, but it's called 2040 because he has a young girl who in 2020 is 4 years old. And he, as a very responsible person who's extremely aware of all the ecological disasters that are looming large on the horizon, is trying to imagine what world his daughter in 2040, when she's in her early 20s, will be living in. And so he travels around the world and takes the camera with him to show us a couple of already existing beautiful initiatives that, if they were expanded to the whole world, would pretty much solve all the problems we have. So there's tiny little solar panels in a village in Bangladesh that get tied up to the neighbor's solar panels and create this link that really improves the conditions in the village without having to resort to receiving electricity from the big corporation. And then there's the algae farm started by Brian van Hertzen, who has noticed that if you do a kelp farm, then kelp is really nutritious. It provides shelter for fish. It filters the water, and it actually draws carbon out of the atmosphere much better than a tree can, and all sorts of other methods like that that already exist. And that if we were free and enterprising enough, and if there were no interference from the few people who will not benefit from us not paying their bills anymore, then if we did all this on a global scale, all our problems would go away really quickly. All the solutions already exist. It's just a matter of trying to get beyond the few factors that are impeding us from implementing them. And I think any mature citizen, especially people who have children, should really read things like Permaculture Magazine, which is a brilliant British magazine with lots of really interesting articles about how you can do things yourself, how the third world is finding amazing solutions all by itself, how this has been done before, excellent readings like this, or the readings of Satish Kumar about being an earth pilgrim, or all these people that you quote and invite into your podcasts. There's lots of solution out there. There's really no excuse. Get in touch with a group of mature citizens around you and start implementing changes at the local level. Do a beach cleanup. Learn how to grow herbs on your windowsill. Start collecting rainwater. Teach your children some survival skills. All sorts of things you can do. Put your compost in a tub with a worm farm, there's so much to be done, and that's already available. So, be an informed citizen and be part of the change that's coming.
Love that. I love that. It's both inspirational and so tangible. You're so amazing.
So are you. Thank you for providing people with the opportunity to learn through your podcast.
Beautiful wisdom, both inspirational and really tangible, and it's empowering. And I think it's sort of like your values of independence and autonomy. I'll take control of that. I'll do what I can. Yeah. And see the really alignment between individual action and the bigger picture. Oh, why? So I'm so lucky this island's got you, and you're just down the road. And
same here. Same here.
So my life's enhanced by knowing you.
Me too.
So we'll put a pause here and see you back for the next Earth Converse podcast. In the meantime, go out and enjoy Earth, one conversation at a time.